Inverse trigonometric functions. Inverse trigonometric functions is when we take the ratio of the sides of a triangle and it gives you the angle. So instead of looking for the ratio like we did in the last video, we're now looking for the angle. And so a few of these that we're going to look over is if we take the inverse of sine, so it can be represented as sine to the -1 x, or it could be represented like this, arc sine of x. So if you see either of these they mean the same thing, but it is looking for the ratio of the angle when we're looking at sine. Now let's look at cosine to the -1. It's our inverse of cosine. So we go cosine -1, or it could be represented as arc cosine x. And then we have tangent to the -1x, which is also can look like this, arc tan of x. So if you see either of these, or when you see the inverse of tangent or the arctan of x, it means the same thing. So let's go over kind of an example here. So when we are saying we're looking at the sine of -1, we're looking at the opposite over the hypotenuse, and that's a ratio because we're looking at two different sides. So say, for instance, our number here for the ratio is 0.57. So we get our calculators out, and then what we do is we take this inverse, we're going to highlight that, go inverse, and then we can go 0.57, and then we take the inverse of that, so sine of 1, and then we get our angle. So we want to make sure we're also in degrees. So this is 34.75. degrees. And if we were to round that to the nearest whole number, it would be 35 degrees. Now let's look at some examples. Example 1. Find the inverse cosine of 0.4384. So we'll get our calculators out. We can go 0.4384 inverse, and we take the cosine, and we find that we can just round to 64. So this is 64 degrees. Now let's do another example. Example 2. Find the inverse of sine of 0.7771. So let's get our calculators out. We go 0.7771 inverse, and we take the sine of that, and we get, if we just round to our nearest whole number, we'll get 51. So 51 degrees. Now let's do another example. Find the inverse of tangent of 2.1445. So we'll get our calculators out, and we're going to go 2.1445, and then we're going to take the inverse of tangent, and we get 65 degrees. So all this is saying is in our right angle that this angle is 65 degrees because we are looking at the opposite over the adjacent. And we're looking at that ratio. And so when you have a ratio of that, we get 65 degrees for our acute angle. Now let's do another example. Example 4. Find the arc sine of 0.9848. So let's get our calculators out. So we would put in 0.9848, take the inverse of sine, and we get 80 degrees. Now let's do one final example. Example 5, find the arc cosine of 0.9848. So once again, we put 9848, take the inverse of cosine, and we get 10 degrees.